This is going to be a hard one. Today we're going to talk about Fnaf, like we have so many other times before on the channel. Speaking of, how many times have we talked about Fnaf on this channel? Let's see. $43. Oh, jeez. For some reason, I thought it was more. Wait. Oh, that's what it is. If you add the game theory videos and all the partner shows, we've technically done 49 episodes on Fnaf. And let me just say, this is not the big 50th episode that I really anticipated. For those of you who don't know, Fnaf has been in the news a lot lately, and not for any good reasons, like the release of a new game, or them finally deciding to make the obvious call and cast me as phone guy in the upcoming movie.
Hello? Hello?
Consider that my audition reel, Blumhouse. I would also be willing to accept the role of purple guy.
Phone guy, Mad Pat, Scott Cawthon.
Now, the reason it's been trending on Twitter and blowing up all over the blogosphere have centered around the creator Scott Cawthon and his recent decision to retire from the series. You heard that right, friends. Scott, my longtime nemesis, is stepping down. Only one will remain standing, and that one is me. He's actually retiring with plenty of money, so who's the real winner here? It's not me. As he himself said in his final post, and I quote, "I've had a blessed, fulfilling," it took me a minute to find it, I'm sorry. "I've had a blessed, fulfilling, and rich career. I've tried to make some good games, let the debate ensue, and I've witnessed the creation of possibly the most creative and talented fan base on the planet. But here, on the 7th anniversary of the first game's trailer, I realize I miss a lot of things that I got to focus on before Fnaf became such a success. I miss making games for my kids, I miss doing it just for fun, and I miss making RPGs even though I stink at it. All this is to say that I'm retiring," end quote. He then goes on to thank everyone for their kindness, say that he's excited to spend time with his family, and assure everyone that Fnaf is going to continue under the guidance of someone of his choosing. Scott, consider this channel my application for the role. I'm here for you, buddy. All kinda joking, but also kinda not joking aside, this alone would be a huge deal, right? One of the most successful indie developers of all time stepping down from his still mega popular series after 7 years, with a book series still being released until the end of the year, a new game on the verge of being released, and a movie that's still in the works. I mean, he takes his victory lap around the internet as everyone celebrates his work, and he fades away to go spend time with his family doing whatever it is that indie devs do with their piles of cash. Buy a cereal wall, a candy room, bacon every day for breakfast. I don't know why I think that, but I just imagine that bacon is something that rich people have for breakfast every day because it's like the best food ever. But that's not the complete picture of what's going on here, because it's actually the circumstances around his retirement that caused the hashtags to trend. You see, in the days leading up to his announcement, word had gotten out that Scott had contributed sizable amounts of money to various political campaigns in the years between 2016 and 2020. Using the website OpenSecrets.com, an independent nonprofit that tracks U.S. political donations, users learned that Scott had contributed around $42,000 to various political campaigns. Now, that on its own might not have been all that newsworthy. No, what made people sit up and take notice was who he had contributed funding to. Republican candidates like Ben Carson, Mitch McConnell, Donald Trump, controversial political figures whose voting histories had been anti-civil rights over the years, especially as it relates to the LGBTQ communities, which, you know, a large portion of the Fnaf fan base is. And I've seen a lot of people online responding with a "so what's the big deal" to all of this news. But you have to stop and actually think for a minute about the position of a lot of the LGBTQ fans of this franchise. This revelation understandably hurt a lot of members of the Fnaf fan community, considering that Scott's franchise has been this welcoming and inclusive space for them. One where a lot of people have found the ability to express their unique identities. To know that their support of these games and their game's creator, especially the financial support that comes with that their dollars had wound up funding campaigns for people who are looking to withhold or remove their rights, to fund the elections of people who would forward legislation that treats them as less than human, yeah, that's gonna feel really horrible. It's gonna feel like a betrayal. It's gonna feel like you had funded your own worst enemy. At first, people thought that Scott's account must have gotten hacked, right? There was no way that he could have done this, or at the very least that maybe he donated to a blanket Republican fund where his dollars had gotten funneled into individual campaigns without his knowledge. But no. After a few days, Scott took to Reddit and affirmed that these were indeed his choices, which then just proceeded to blow the internet up even more. A few days later, he retired, and that was that. A confusing and awkward end to the career of someone who had legitimately changed the face of horror and indie gaming forever. Now, a lot of you have been asking me for my response to the whole thing. Does the channel stop covering Fnaf? Do I still support Scott? How do I feel about all this? How should you feel about all this? And honestly, there is a lot to unpack here. A lot. One of the reasons it's taken me so long to respond is because I've had to sort it all out in my own head. I didn't really know how to feel. We've been teaching my son Oliver, who just turned 3 recently, about how sometimes you can feel multiple emotions at once and how that's confusing and how it's hard sometimes. And that lesson at 3 is still just as hard when you're 33. So I had to take time to do my own soul searching and do my own research, quite honestly. One of the great things about the internet is that it moves so fast, right? You need something and boom, it is right there available at your fingertips. But one of the awful things about the internet is that boom, it moves so fast. There is no time to think. Everything requires an immediate response, a hot take, your knee-jerk reaction, a headline. Search trends last for like a day or 2 at best. New game releases are like old by the end of the week. New video, well, gotta be the first to like and comment without actually watching what it's about. There's no time for thoughts, for research, for introspection if you're going to be part of a conversation, or no time to look back and actually analyze the data. I mean, heck, by the time that you bothered to finish reading Scott's response to all this drama, he had already posted his retirement. So, since this is going to be a long and tricky episode to say the least, let me start off by making it crystal clear that I am pro-LGBTQ rights. And you don't have to take my word for that. I was in theater for years before I started doing YouTube, and it is difficult to be a narrow-minded bigot in that industry. If you know, you know. I'm a member of the LA LGBT Center, and I attend their events because I support their mission. And most importantly, I've done the best I can to keep a sensitive ear open to LGBT audience members, and also to my team members when they tell me that something isn't okay, or no longer okay, or they explain an LGBT perspective that I don't know or understand because I don't live that. I don't have that experience in my life, so I'll never be able to know everything or be able to truly speak on behalf of people in that community, but the best I can do is to try and remain an ally who's always ready to be supportive and as sensitive as I can be. Anyway, I don't say all this to make excuses or try to defend myself by wrapping up in a rainbow flag. Actually, coming off of Pride Month, it actually bothers me how so many companies just use identity politics to be trendier, try to sell more merch. It feels more like clout chasing to me rather than, you know, actual stances on things. Now, I believe that if you want real change, it's not changing your logo to a rainbow for 30 days, but rather it's giving people of all types opportunities 365 days of the year, regardless of how they identify or who they love. And I'm proud to say that the team consists of people all across the spectrum, and I'm proud that they're here because they're talented, and they deserve the chance to show off their unique creativity. Which is why, before I get to addressing the actual hardest subject of all this, Scott himself, I think it's important to say this right up front, or I guess as upfront as I can in this long of a video. I will still be covering and supporting Fnaf as a franchise. Just like game theory has become so much more than just me sitting in my closet nerding out every week, and is now a collaboration of creative people coming from all different walks of life, Five Nights at Freddy's is much more than just a single guy living in Texas. I know, it's easy to point at his little anim dude avatar and assign everything in the franchise to him. Heck, I've made a running gag out of our little rivalry over the years. But in reality, Scott's just a figurehead, a visual shorthand to represent everyone who is now instrumental to the running of this franchise. All the authors and illustrators of the books, other game developers, merch companies, the Fazbear spin-off universe of fan games, each employing dozens of people who use the franchise as their launch pad for their livelihoods, or as their own personal creative outlet. By not supporting the franchise as a whole, I'm not supporting those creators. And even more importantly, it's also that I wouldn't be supporting the community itself. The people who still do find this franchise as a safe haven, a source of entertainment, a source for their unique creative expression. Scott said it in his retirement announcement. I read it earlier. I've witnessed the creation of possibly the most creative and talented fan base on the planet. And he's not kidding. There are so few fandoms like the Fnaf fandom. I mean, what other franchise has so many darn fan games dedicated to it? And to me, these fans are the lifeblood of the community now, of this entire franchise now, not just Scott himself. And let me make it clear, just because I choose to support the series doesn't mean that I think anyone is wrong to not support it. That's definitely not the case. Wherever you choose to draw the line on this issue is completely valid. I'm just taking you through my thought process and all the variables that I went through as I came to terms with this whole issue. But aren't I, by supporting the series, contributing to Scott's income and thereby what he chooses to do with that, you might ask? And yeah, you probably are, sadly. And that's just a choice that everyone's going to have to make based on their own personal criteria. To me, the good of supporting the community around the franchise and the jobs that it creates is worth whatever minor impact that Scott may be able to enact in the political sphere, which is an issue we'll be getting to in a second. Because here's the thing, friends, this sort of dilemma applies to pretty much any major company that you talk about. There are good people and bad people pretty much everywhere, and not even that extreme. There are just people that you agree with and people that you disagree with everywhere. For one example that I think we could all relate to, just look at Walt Disney. There's great evidence to show that Walt was probably prejudiced against other races, women, other religions. As one biographer states, quote, Disney willingly, even enthusiastically embraced anti-Semites and cast his fate with them. So, do you stop watching Disney movies as a result of that money going directly into his pockets? Or, I guess at this point, the cryogenic pod that the Walt popsicle waits in waiting to be reincarnated one day? Or, a more recent and much more extreme example, billionaire JK Rowling, creator of the Harry Potter universe, who has just all sorts of problematic viewpoints that she chooses to share on Twitter. Do you stop supporting the Harry Potter franchise to prevent adding to her immense wealth? You can, and it is absolutely a valid option. Hitting people in their pocketbook is always the best place to get them to notice. But where things get complicated is when you start looking to their influence outside of just their IP. J.K. Rowling, for instance, is rumored to earn a cut of every ticket sold to Universal Studios. Does that mean you then boycott that entire place? Even if that isn't true, it's still a licensing deal that she profits from, and by going, you contribute to her ongoing success. It is like this impossible dilemma. I think the TV show The Good Place actually summed this issue up best.
These days, just buying a tomato at a grocery store means that you are unwittingly supporting toxic pesticides, exploiting labor, contributing to global warming. Humans think that they're making one choice, but they're actually making dozens of choices they don't even know they're making.
In my mind, it ultimately amounts to a personal choice where you have to weigh the good of a decision against the bad. As YouTube video essayist Lindsay Ellis said in her examination of whether you can support Harry Potter without supporting J.K. Rowling.
Because of her wealth and influence, she's going to be believed more than the lived experience of trans people. And while you can absolutely control the way you read or engage with a text, you cannot control the way an author uses their money and influence.
And if LGBT rights are something very important to you and you think Scott is dangerous to those, then him stepping down from the franchise and removing himself from social media dismantles a lot of the things that could make him dangerous moving forward. So you can always weigh that into your consideration of how you're going to view the overall franchise. Again, where you choose to draw that line is absolutely your choice and your choice alone. I'm just taking you through my week of soul searching and all the factors. So that's why I'm choosing to support the franchise moving forward, but it leads perhaps to the biggest question of them all, which is Scott himself. How to feel about him, you know? Again, because the internet moves so fast and because everyone just hates to read, I never really saw people looking at what he actually said in his response to all this drama. Instead, just jumping to the conclusion of, well, he admitted that he donated to these people, so he needs to be canceled now. And hey, to some people, that's enough. Just supporting some of these individuals is an outright deal breaker. And again, that is totally your right to make that call. But to me, I wanted to know more, right? Because I had a feeling that maybe this is tied to the state of American politics. And this is stepping way outside of my comfort zone here on game theory, but personally, I just hate American politics. It's always been a frustrating process to me because it forces you into one of two buckets. Are you red or are you blue? Are you elephant or are you donkey? Are you Republican or are you Democrat? It is a binary choice between two parties, two people that are for these really important jobs, and that's about it. There are no other options. Or there are other options in the form of independent candidates and third parties, but because the system is set up the way it is, they don't really stand that much of a chance. And so everyone is always telling you that if you vote for them, you're throwing away your vote. So long story short, most elections just wind up being a compromise. You have to pick and choose whatever your most important issues are for that election cycle, and because no one candidate truly embodies them all, you have to vote for the lesser of two evils, in a sense. There is never this one perfect candidate that truly represents me as the voter, and I hate that. And I wouldn't be surprised if maybe Scott felt like he was in a similar position. So I wanted to look closer at his response. And admittedly, it's a long one, but I think it's important to not overly edit Scott's words in this case, but don't worry, we'll break it down as we go through it. I've debated greatly how best to address this, including not addressing it at all. But with so many people from the LGBT community in the fan base that I love, that's not an option. I'd like to think that the last 7 years would have given me the benefit of the doubt in regards to how I try to treat people. But there I was, trending on Twitter for being a homophobe, getting doxxed, with people threatening to come to my house. All this because I exercised my right and my duty as an American citizen to vote for and support the candidates who I felt could best run the country. For everyone. And that's something that I won't apologize for. Okay, let's break there for a minute. First, as someone who has received very vivid death threats and have had to go into hiding out of fear of my family's life, just because I do a dumb show online where I call Sonic slow, personal attacks and threats are not okay. Never. Period. End of story. Agree or disagree with him for who he chooses to support, fine. Pull your support of him, of his franchise, of his games, absolutely. But harassing and threatening someone's life and his family simply because they supported someone you disagree with makes you no better than the people that you're fighting. That's just the way I feel. And when it comes to giving Scott the benefit of the doubt, like he asks for in this response, honestly, he has that from me. It's easy to overlook, but Scott over the years has donated over $1.2 million of his own money to charity.
Scott called it himself!
Including $50,000 to the Trevor Project, an organization that is focused on helping LGBTQ youth. Does that necessarily negate the $42,000 that he made in political donations? Again, that is a personal choice for you to make the call on, but I think it at least merits hearing the guy out. Anyway, the quote continues. For those of you who took the time to look, you saw that the candidates I supported included men, women, white people, black people, Republicans, and Democrats. I supported Kimberly Classic in Baltimore because I believed that she really cared for the African-American community there and wanted to pull them out of poverty. I believe she could have really made a difference in a time when so many black communities were struggling. She lost, unfortunately. I supported Tulsi Gabbard, a Democrat, even though I disagreed with her on several issues, because I felt she would have been a good and fair president. And yes, I supported President Trump because I felt he was the best man to fuel a strong economy and stand up to America's enemies abroad, of which there are many. Even if there were candidates who had better things to say to the LGBT community directly and bigger promises to make, I believe that their stances on other issues would have ended up doing much greater harm to those communities than good. All of this explanation, I fear, is wasted, as people don't want to discuss with one another anymore. They want endless apologies and submission. People who are expecting those from me will get neither, end quote. Okay, so now this gets to the heart of the problem that people had with Scott, who he chose to support through his donation dollars. And the list is quite long. If you look at opensecrets.com, 16 candidates specifically singled out for donation dollars, with one Democrat, Tulsi Gabbard from Hawaii, like he called out in a statement, who, in his response, he not only chooses to support, but actually calls out as his first choice of candidate for president. I think this actually merits looking into. It's a bit weird. I'm about to roll into kind of like a mini game theory on political donations, which I don't really love, but hey, if we're doing it, let's do it right, so here we go. So, looking at the timeline of his 2019 and 2020 donations, Tulsi is in fact the first to receive any money from Scott, followed by his donation to Trump 2 months later. Now, this timing also happens to coincide with Tulsi starting to lag in the polls. What this tells me implicitly is that when his first choice, Tulsi, was no longer a viable presidential candidate, he instead pivoted and donated to the candidate that he most believed in, who also had the best shot of winning, Donald Trump. But what was the policy that Scott appears to have cared about the most? Well, if you look into all of the candidates that he chooses to support, there's one and only one commonality across all of them: tough foreign policy, keeping the military strong, keeping trade strong, and standing against foreign powers like North Korea. This also coincides with his statements about defending against enemies abroad, recovering the economy, and how other issues would do more harm to the country than good. Apparently to Scott, nothing worse can happen to your civil rights than getting dunked on by an overseas nuke. Now, I've seen people say that everyone on Scott's donation list also had a history of opposing same-sex and transgender rights. I chose to look into this, and across the board, that's largely true, except for Tulsi, who, well, she was inconsistent about it at best. It's true, she had a history of being anti-LGBT, but since joining Congress in 2013, she supported efforts to promote LGBT equality, including co-sponsoring pro-LGBT legislation like the Equality Act, which, if you don't know, is a bill to amend the 1964 Civil Rights Act to promote and protect LGBT individuals. And then, again, at the top of 2019, she went on Twitter to defend trans Americans in the military, so big ups to her on all of that. However, things get more complicated because in 2020, her reputation was again put into question when she introduced a bill that many saw as anti-transgender, something that was leveled hard against Scott's choice to support her. But it's worth noting that this was after Scott chose to donate to her campaign. The TLDR of all of that voting nonsense is this: when Scott chose to support her campaign, publicly facing, she was pro-trans rights. That's it. That's the best I can put it. Outside of that, the only commonality that I could see across pretty much every candidate that Scott chose to support was keeping the military strong. Now, to be sure, not everyone places the same emphasis on that issue or considers America at high risk. People on the other side of this issue may believe that the bigger threat is personal rights of people who are already in the country. Again, I am not here to decide that issue or pass judgment on anyone's priorities. God forbid, I do not want to do that. But it is my theory, my political theory, that Scott, like so many other Americans, may have found himself caught in a situation where no one candidate truly reflected the complete slate of policies that he supported. And when his first choice of candidate bowed out of the race, one who was publicly pro-LGBTQ rights at the time, he moved on to the next best option in his mind, considering the issue that he thought was most important, in this case foreign policy, therefore him supporting Trump. And let me be clear, I'm not trying to explain away his actions or anything like that, not at all. Am I surprised that he donated to these people? Yeah, but is it enough for me to throw away all the goodwill that I've seen him put into this franchise and his community over the years? No. It's not. Like I said, a donation is a donation, and to many that is more than enough to condemn him, but I just thought it was interesting in my research and deserved to be called out when talking about this really complicated topic. I think the challenge here is that life isn't black and white, red or blue, and that the internet a lot of times struggles with nuance. It struggles with those gray areas. I gotta be honest, I'm sad that this is how everything wound up. Seeing scottgames.com go dark after years of me checking it for updates or digging into the source code for hidden clues, it was a sobering moment. It was a sad moment knowing that it was dead now, as a fan of this franchise and as someone who respects all the work that Scott's done. But I think the solace that I have, and what I would encourage anyone out there who is struggling with this to look at, is the net good that this series has provided. Regardless of Scott's political affiliation, his true beliefs, whatever they may be, this series has been a source of security and identity for so many people over the last 7 years, and it will continue to be that moving forward for even more. Life just isn't a game of absolutes. Life is all about trying to do the greatest good with the hand that you've been dealt, and the good that is spawned out of Freddy and his friends, for creators, for fans, for gaming as a whole, it's incalculable. My last few theories have had this recurring theme of, it's a new era of Fnaf, the old story is dead, we're on to the next iteration of this franchise, blah, 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 blah. And I gotta be honest, now that rings true more than ever. But I assure you, I'll be here with you for the ride. But hey, that's not a theory, honestly. That's a fact. I am going to be here with you for the ride. But this is a game theory. Thank you for watching, and thank you for staying open-minded. I'll see you in the next one.